Hello and welcome to my round 2 report on the candidates tournament held here in London. Round 1 saw 4 draws. Today we had 2 decisive results and those are the games I'd like to concentrate on here. I should just mention that in the other 2 games, the draws, Carlsen was held by Kramnik pretty easily. That game finished very quickly, and Gridshuk against Fiedler was a draw. Well, quite complex, but neither player was really in any trouble. So here we go. Aronian against Gelfand. That's our first decisive game I'd like to look at. This game started off as a Reti, English, but very quickly transposed into a very well-known variation of the Panov-Botvinnik attack that was actually first seen in the Botvinnik-Petrosian World Championship match in 1963. A really well-known variation, and here Botvinnik, I think it was Botvinnik who first played this move. Instead of recapturing the knight, he played bishop c4, a very clever move indeed. Now, the idea is, if the knight moves away, then you can take on f7 and recapture the knight. So basically, white isn't sacrificing anything here. If e6, then pawn takes, and now it's difficult for black to develop. If the bishop goes that way, you play bishop a3, and well, that's a little bit complex. And if the bishop goes that way, then you can always play bishop h6. This is the idea of bishop c4. So back to this position. Knight d5 is really the main line now. Now black gives away the knight, but gains time by attacking the bishop. And this is generally the way that white plays. So we have a position of dynamic imbalance. Both sides have strengths and weaknesses. You can play queen d5 here, bishop g7 is possible. Gelfand played bishop e7. And, well, Gelfand actually had this in the game a couple of months ago against Yakovenko, and his opponent played bishop f4. But Gelfand succeeded in making you draw actually very easily in this position. I mean, black's pawn structure is very healthy here. Instead, Aronian played bishop e3, so clearly, he was obviously aware of that game. And, well, as Aronian said after the game, in this kind of endgame that they reached, white can play without any risk at all. So this is the game continuation. White's pieces look pretty good, and I mean, in particular, the rooks have pressure against these pawns, but black does have 2 bishops. You could also say that white's pawn structure isn't very good. So both sides have their trumps, their strengths and weaknesses. Let's see how the game develops. Bishop b7. Well, this bishop is a rotten piece. If this bishop could emerge the other side of the pawn chain, black would be absolutely fine. So this is one of the key themes in the game. Knight e5. And now what happens? Let's see. This is a very typical situation actually. Let's have a look and see what happens if white were to grab that pawn. I mean, this is actually what Gelfand wants, because in this situation, now black has lost a pawn, but now having got rid of that bishop, the b file is clear, so black can start attacking these pawns. I mean, this a pawn can be held very easily with the bishop here. This d pawn is nothing to write home about. Basically, although a pawn down, black is absolutely fine here. So instead of taking that pawn, which would help black to get rid of that bishop, Aronian played knight c4. It's a very tricky move indeed. So now the bishop is hit. And again, Aronian is targeting that bishop, and that forces it off this long diagonal. So it's come to not such a good diagonal, and only now does Aronian take the pawn, now that black is unable to exchange bishop for knight. So very nice manoeuvring from Aronian, and there's no doubt about it. He is slightly better here. He can play this position without any risk. Still, should be a draw, but okay, let's see what happened. Aronian took and played the knight back to e5. He couldn't find anything better. And after the game, Aronian thought that Gelfand should have played rook c8 here. Now, if you exchange, then white has nothing. And, well, Aronian thought this was a bit unpleasant for black, but this is definitely the way for black to play. I mean, one idea is maybe you can exchange and go for an opposite colour bishop's ending. I mean, white is still a bit better there, but okay, that's one possibility. Should be a draw. Instead, Gelfand played bishop d8, and he's starting to drift a little bit here. And in fact, well, he'd overlooked a tactical idea. Bishop b6 should be played, and well, there's an interesting variation here. Aronian's intention was to play d5, giving up this pawn, but allowing the exchange of bishops, after which the rook penetrates to c7. Black is probably okay here, but it's a difficult defense. Still, that's what black should play here. Instead, Gelfand played rook c8, which looks absolutely fine, but he's overlooked a beautiful tactic. Bishop h6, what a wonderful move. If that bishop is taken, then white exchanges on c8 and wins the bishop on d8, and now it's 2 pawns and, well, very easy win in the endgame. And if king f6, you can force that with bishop g5, king takes, and so on. Very similar to the last variation. So the king had to come back, but now, what a terrible square for the king on g8, just trapped by the bishop here. Aronian exchanged and played knight c6, and this knight dominates black's bishops. I mean, it's incredible how it manages to do that. Well, one thing is the bishop can't come to b6 because of knight e7 winning the bishop. So the bishop has to come to f6. Now, this is very clever from Aronian. Of course, he could take on a7, but then bishop b7, and black is fighting back here. The knight, suddenly the bishop dominates the knight. Actually, the knight can't come back to its best square on c6. Instead, Aronian played b5, an excellent move. So it means that that knight still dominates this bishop on f6. Absolutely beautiful. And of course, there's still the chance to play knight a7. Bishop d7 played, and again, not knight a7, but g4. Fantastic move. And black is utterly lost here. The idea is to force away that bishop. There are some funny variations. Okay, let's see what happens if black tries to undermine the knight. We play g5. If the bishop goes back to h8, that's actually checkmate. That's how much trouble the king is in. And if bishop g7, we check, and b6, that knight still dominates the bishop. The bishop can't come to c8 or c6 to stop that pawn. I mean, what an extraordinary position. And if a takes b5, again, knight b8, and that knight, it's the hardest working knight in professional chess today. The knight hits the bishop, and this bishop is attacked as well, so black will lose a piece, and well, it's an easy win for white. Okay, Gelfand tried g5, but h4, and the bishop is still in desperate trouble. If bishop g7, well, this wins very, very easily again. The pawn is just going to go home. So Gelfand tried bishop c6. The bishop has to drop back to stop the pawn. And now Aronian just brought the king forward to collect the pawn on h4. And here Gelfand actually resigned. The king is going to take the pawn, and, well, let's see possible variation. If black sits there, then you can, well, for example, sack a pawn and bring the bishop back, and you win a piece. Okay, it's an easy win for white. Look at the king, absolutely dreadful on g8, still trapped in by the bishop on h6. So a nice win for Aronian. He didn't have to sweat too much He was always in control in that game, but Gelfand made a terrible blunder. Okay, that was one of the decisive games. Now let's take a look at Radyabov against, if I can find the game, Radyabov against Ivanchuk. Here we go. Well, here, Radyabov with the white pieces playing d4, and Ivanchuk played a very aggressive line, a very risky line though, the so-called Leningrad Dutch. Now, the problem is that when you play f5, an aggressive move, perhaps you can use the pawn to attack, but you also weaken the diagonals here towards the king. And this is the downside of playing the Dutch defense. Okay, let's see. Pretty normal development. I'll get to the critical moment in a second. Okay, standard position. Now rook b1. This is a very sensible move. I mean, white just intends playing b4, possibly b5, possibly d5, maybe getting the bishop to b2. And of course, it's sensible to have the rook behind the b pawn and also getting off this long diagonal. Knight e4 played, and well, in fact, Radyabov said after the game that he couldn't really remember much Leningrad theory, but he did remember that Kramnik had defeated Nakamura in this game. That's in this exact variation, so he was kind of copying Kramnik actually. And here Kramnik played rook d1 and won a very nice game, but I really like the way Radyabov played here. He played very simply. He just took on e5 and used his advantage in development. It's a terribly simple way to play. So you can see that all white's pieces are active in this position. And it's just really simple. So both rooks are on open files. Okay, the queen is ready to attack if the moment arises. Well, all white's pieces look good, and look at black's pieces still on the back rank. So okay, the queen is hit, and Ivanchuk played it to the side. Now, excellent move from white. e4. Now this really starts to break up black's pawn front and prevents black from playing pawn to e4 himself. And later on, we're going to basically start to open up black's king with this move e4. So for example, knight d7, we take on f5, then maybe bishop d6, and those pawns starting to look like they're vulnerable. Okay, therefore Ivanchuk played f4, rook d3. Well, that just avoids any unpleasant pin there, but also perhaps white wants to double. Okay, Ivanchuk took here and played knight a6. It's about time he developed. But already white has a fantastic initiative here. That rook is in some trouble. So, okay, it's switching around, trying to find a decent home, but it's a horrible position actually. For instance, here, well, we played c5, and you can see, I mean, what a fantastic piece here. And that diagonal has opened, maybe queen b3 check is coming at some point. So Ivanchuk played bishop f6, and that offers an exchange. Radyabov could have taken, but maybe he thought that black should be okay here. If the knight can settle on c5, then certainly black has decent compensation. But I think quite correctly, Radyabov decided, well, that bishop is actually stronger than that rook. The rook is just dreadful, and that bishop is wonderful on d6. And that bishop h3. Okay, the pressure mounts. I mean, it's a terrible, terrible position here for black. And now Radyabov found a very simple move. Bishop takes e5. If queen takes, then rook d8 is actually going to be mate. Radyabov said after the game he thought bishop g5 here was the only move for black to continue. And he hadn't quite worked out what he was going to do here. I mean, if king takes here, then I imagine we can just play rook takes b7. That's pretty bad. If queen e4, yeah, I mean, he wasn't sure. He thought there should be a win here, and indeed there is. It's a bit complicated. And here there's a very tricky move, f3. Well, it's a computer move, I confess, but f3 is a winning move. For example, takes queen h4. Basically, the king is in a mating net here, and so on. Okay, let's play to the end. Takes and queen h4 mate, all forced. Let's go back. But you know, finding that continuation for white would not be easy. But and certainly Radyabov had not seen that variation during the game. I mean, it's too long, but he guessed there would be something. Instead, Ivanchuk simply gave up his queen here, but in this position, well, I mean, really, black is just lost here. Well, black has a rook and a bishop against the queen, but I mean, with white centre, this is pretty bad. And to add to that, Ivanchuk was in dreadful time pressure, and well, Radyabov is very, very good when his opponent's a short time. He's an excellent blitz player, and he just kept playing very quickly and avoided any tactics. Grabbed a pawn, just, you know, sensible, strong moves. And although Ivanchuk has a bit of counterplay on the king side, you know, when you're short of time, it's very, very difficult to defend this position, to play this position correctly. And yeah, Radyabov just kept hammering out the moves very, very quickly. And here, well, he gave up. He gave back in exchange. I'll come back to this position in a moment. And here, actually, Ivanchuk lost on time. Well, I think he is lost here. You know, for example, queen takes c6. Oh, maybe that one's... Yeah, no, that's still okay. For example, check we can take, and queen d5 check, we pick up the knight. I mean, basically, white has too many pawns here. But let me go back a couple of moves. I mean, I know this is completely irrelevant. You know, Ivanchuk was short of time, and you're never going to find this in the game. But according to the computers, g4 is actually gives black some chances here. But you know, you're never going to find this in a normal game of chess. f4 just looks like it's winning for white, but in fact, I mean, let me show you the main variation. Check, and again, it just looks absolutely hopeless for black, but there is a miracle move here, namely knight g5. Although black has only a rook for the queen, this amazing move seems to hold for black. Now, Radyabov could probably avoid this, but it's interesting to see if rook takes, then knight f3 check, and the king should not go in the corner because of the mate on h2, but after this it'll just be a draw. So I mean, who knows whether g4 actually is good enough for a draw, but it was Ivanchuk's only chance, and there are, as you've just seen, a miracle save there. But you're never going to find this in a game, particularly when you've just got seconds on the clock. So, I mean, I'm not criticising Radyabov for sort of overlooking this. In fact, I'm praising Radyabov for his very practical play when Ivanchuk was short of time. So there we go. After 2 rounds, we have 2 leaders in the tournament with 1.5 points, Radyabov and Aronian. Thanks very much for watching.